Welcome back. This is Victoria from Women's Issues, Women's Voices. And in my Zoom studio today, I have with me Cheryl Clark and Martha Eddy, who are two of my Somatic movement colleagues, also colleagues in the Somatic anti-activism work that I have been very involved with over this past year. And Cheryl and Martha both bring decades of experience in this work. And I ended talking about the table and how this research of the table, and in the break, we talked about how I just brought in these assumptions, right? That people have a table, that people have a mother, father, me, my sister, right? Like that was my experience, but that it's not the experience of everyone. And the part that I didn't say explicitly in the first half was the interesting thing about the research was how the research was actually showing how this kind of established pattern, which for Eurocentric Americans could be very normal, that the dad sits at one end, the mom sits at the other end, right? Actually limited the way the brain developed. It wasn't seen as a strength. It wasn't seen as a building of resiliency. So everyday things like sitting at a table or not sitting at a table, right? When we bring it down to the breath. How does that thing, which, my goodness, it's the very first piece of life, the breath. How is it a social justice issue? Which of you would like to start?
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Martha. As I said, we have been talking quite a bit about assumptions and assumptions in race. And I'm going to come back to the white modeling around race as the definer of the American experience. In the same way, Victoria, that you gave the example of the table and the mother and father as a definer of an American experience, which not everyone in the United States has that particular experience. But one, and I mean myself, I can go out in the world and think, oh, everyone has my experience the way I experience my breathing, where I feel comfort in my breathing, because I have been given that. I've been given that space to be in my body in a certain way, and I have felt safe. But that isn't everyone. So that is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about models of assumption, and even physical models of assumption. And that in the social justice work that we're looking at and investigating, the white model segregates the Black experience or the Asian experience. And there's this need to conform and to assimilate. And that's a very American idea: assimilation. Assimilate, lose your language, assimilate with English, right? I'm from a culture that has a language. I'm Armenian. My family did not lose their language. They kept their language. There's this drive to lose something of yourself, to assimilate with a white body that may or may not accept you. That is what I am exploring in my work as a teacher, in my work as a therapist, and learning. And you said something earlier, Victoria, about comfort. I have to be in my discomfort around dismantling my assumptions. So I've
Yes.
had all this ability to be comfortable. Now I have to see, how can I work with discomfort?
Cheryl, I would like you to stop and just say that slower, because I feel like even if it doesn't resonate with a listener, that is the message that I feel like I've been embodying and trying to figure out how to share with others, especially people with white bodies and especially activists with white bodies. Can you share that about sitting with your own discomfort?
Discomfort. We have to allow ourselves for discomfort. And Martha earlier said the resiliency, that I've had all this comfort and I have assumed other people would be comfortable with me. This is the dining room table experience. But then you hear someone with a very different lived experience. And this is this idea that Martha introduced earlier, Soma. My lived experience is mine. Your lived experience is yours. Mine is not better. And that's that Euro model as the template for all these other experiences. And it's like a top down rather than looking at and experiencing each other on the level playing field. And for me, and I'm going to say, for those of you who are white, only white bodied, can you be on that same level field and feel your own not quite being easy? It's a short time.
And the thing is, and bringing breath in as a social justice issue, for those of us who do have, you said something earlier about who feel safe enough to breathe. I feel like it's so important that we learn to use our breath to help us sit with our discomfort rather than getting into the guilt and the shame and getting all caught up in like that my white advantages, oh my God, now I'm going to focus on how bad I feel about my white advantages. And I totally lose my breath. And I'm also totally not then transforming anything. Right. And so for me, that's where breath as a social justice issue is if you are living in a body that does feel safe enough to breathe, then I feel like it's my responsibility to learn how to breathe and be uncomfortable. Yeah. Come on in, Martha.
Thank you. What a rich conversation. I want to speak to this breathing from another perspective, which is, of course, we're all breathing, we're alive. So what are we talking about? And I think what we're getting at, and this is a little technical, it's biological, but it's this idea that we have two parts of our automatic nervous system, this nervous system that just sort of takes over in different situations. So for instance, the siesta is that state where your body has just had a great meal and you want to rest because your body's taking in its nutrients. We call that the parasympathetic state. And when we do deep breathing, we're moving into a parasympathetic state. And yet, many of us, myself, very much, this was my childhood experience. Ghetto living, fires on the block, mattresses on fire in my building multiple times a year, meaning we had to evacuate, no heat, no hot water, rats, this kind of experience that I lived with puts me in a different state. It's called a sympathetic state, which is kind of interesting oxymoron, I guess. I don't even know what you call it. But that sympathetic state is a state that in its heightened level, because it can be a medium level where I'm just present and upstanding. But if you take it higher, it comes into hypervigilance. It comes into, I'm going to run. It comes into, I'm going to fight back. It comes into, I'm going to freeze. It comes into, I've got all these feelings, but none of them are appropriate. So I'm going to appease, I'm going to pretend everything's okay. But actually my nervous system, and you notice I'm talking faster right now, and I could get really loud, and I could be very loud if I wanted to. So this is the somatic experience of being in a sympathetic state. And what is wrong with that? In my mind, there's nothing wrong with it. And I think it's one thing white bodies need to get more comfortable with, is that there are people that have been living in this more heightened state.
Yes,
It might be
yes.
considered more masculine. It might be considered more Black. It might be considered more whatever. But if we can't recognize that it's just part of life and stand up within that, then we are actually denying a certain assumption. And that often is what keeps us from, also white bodies, from also exhaling and going, oh, I need to relax. So I said a lot of different things there. Now I want to get back to an experience that one of my colleagues shared. The school I'm involved with, that I am a Ferraro Fellow at, has a prison education program. Marymount Manhattan College has one of the only full BAs for incarcerated women. And it's been going on a long time. This is nothing new. So one of my colleagues in the dance department went in and was doing some breath work with some of the incarcerated women. And they said, we can't do this. You know, this is like asking us to turn down our hypervigilance when we don't trust the prison guard. We don't know if we're going to get abused in some way. So, and I had the same experience with children. I go into public schools in New York City to add movement, whether it's somatic, meaning more this balancing of the nervous system, or not, may or may not happen. But basically, I would do a lot with kids to relax their eyes. Right now, I'm covering my eyes with my hands. We call it palming. It's a yogic tradition. It's a way to just relax the eyes. It's great if you've been zooming too much. But mostly boys, didn't want to do it. And I had to respect that. They did not feel safe with eyes closed or eyes covered. So I would give them a drawing task, and they were really happy with that. It was like a labyrinth drawing. And so it was calming. It served the same purpose. But to assume someone wants to calm down at all is the first premise. And the second is, if we do, and most of us do need to rest, it's part of the human experience, then what types of calming down are not appeasement to make it easier on the white teacher, for instance, but actually helping everybody feel more at comfort with whatever is present. And how can we just turn to each other and say, what would feel good to you? What feels safe to you? Rather than assuming that I know. I'll pause there.
And I just love that as you're talking and I'm feeling my discomfort, because every single thing you just said about assumption and about, I think about it as, caretaking, deciding that I, as the therapist, know the best, or as the partner or the mother or the daughter, whatever role I happen to be in, right? And feeling my discomfort as you're talking about it, and also letting myself sit and go, oh yeah, stuff to, like, not to go into the judgment space, but to actually go, oh, okay, is this how I want to be today? Right.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think we're just saying it over and over again with different words. How can we develop comfort around discomfort? Because if we want to be anti-racist or anti-sexist or anti-many things, we need the resiliency, that was the word Cheryl brought up again, to sit with discomfort and to find out how to caretake for ourselves and find out what helps us. So that sometimes people can figure that out on their own, with writing, with just going for a walk. Sometimes we need to talk with a friend or in a group around this. And I will say again that I've so appreciated our ISMETA group, which is the Somatic Movement looking at my grandmother's hands, the book by Resmaa Menakem, as a tool for that.
Well, and I want to use this as a shifting to us talking about the exhaustion, right? Because what I'm hearing it in my own body, right? Oh my God, but it's so exhausting to be constantly checking in with myself so that I make sure that, you know, I'm not excluding and I'm not, shutting anyone down, right? And recognizing that, like, for me, what this work this year has been so important, I've become like passionate about, there are the times when I just want to be in my comfort zone, right? I do not want to be thinking or really being on about what's going on in my environment, right? And the thing is that this is my space, right? And I think every person needs that, right? When, right? Where, who, what, who do you include? What do you include in your space? And this is for anyone that brings some comfort, right? And I think about that I think about people who are walking around, who, like, are there places of comfort for people who are walking around in bodies that are not white, that do not fit our culture, right?
So
And
this is super, super quick, but
yeah,
just to shout out that for those schools where they're attempting to find out why the Black kids sit together at the lunch table, just to say, stop trying to change that. It's a chance for during the day to just relax and be with people that understand. And I mean, I got that question in 1989 when I did my first piece on growing up in East Harlem as a performance piece. And back then, it was just like, let people have their time at the table. I'm going to say enough about that. Cheryl,
yeah.
you wanted to say something.
So yeah, speaking about all of that.
I did. Victoria, you brought up something that this idea of exhaustion, and there's a word that rears into the forefront for me, and that's trauma. And trauma, the exhaustion that we are feeling this year is nothing, in a way, to the historical exhaustion.
Yes.
The historical exhaustion the historical exhaustion of going out of your home and maybe not knowing you won't come back.
Being in your home and not knowing,
and not being able to say this home is safe.
right?
So, and I think this is what Martha was mentioning before about this always feeling like you're always vigilant. I always have to protect. That's tiring.
Mm-hmm.
That's truly tiring. A lifetime of it. A lifetime. So there's this kind of, I'm in this, like, I have this like struggle around like hearing about, oh, this has just been so hard.
Mm-hmm.
Think about people who've lived it. And I think, and that's the empathy. That's the embodied empathy. So if you are uncomfortable, I think that's great. Desire more of it. And then you will really start getting in a conversation and a wavelength and maybe an understanding about what has been the everyday reality for many of our citizens of color in this country.
It is. Yeah. Yeah.
So with that, I'm feeling the word upstanding. It has so many, like upstanding citizen. I have different reactions. It's like stand up, love it. Upstanding citizen could be judgmental. But being a bystander versus an upstander, someone that really, and in our parlance, in our language of movement, we talk about being reflexive. We also talk about being responsive, and it's a continuum.
Right.
When are we reflexive, and in the middle between reflexes and responding with equilibrium, with keeping a balance, there's something called the righting, meaning uprighting reaction.
Right.
And
Yes.
I just want to, I think I'd like to end, and of course, Victoria, you decide, but with just having everybody feel their spines and deciding, like, how long would you like your spine to be? And in many traditions, a long spine can become dignity. Like, do I shrink and feel maybe not as worthy? Do I expand, or do I become so long and so haughty that I'm now domineering? And just to take a moment to feel where you are with your posture, with your breath supporting your spine, to see how kind of upright or upstanding or just vertical and dignity, how much dignity you feel comfortable embodying.
And we have a half a minute, right? So, and with that feeling of that vertical, just also, going back to that idea of letting yourself look around and noticing what you see, who you interact with every day, and what assumptions are embedded in that, right? And how to move into spaces, whether it's internal or external, where those assumptions get challenged. Thank you both so much. Thank you, listeners. Again, if you have any questions about today, if you want any of the information that people shared, like more links, we definitely have them. You can contact me at WIWV@kopn.org. And please put Victoria in the subject lines, because that's an email shared by the whole collective. Thank you, ladies. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Victoria.